Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the Necron Dynasties Commander Deck from the new 40k Magic crossover set. This is the third out of fourth decks that they revealed, and the core mechanics for this deck revolve around graveyard, bringing things back from death, and artifact synergy. Again, the artwork for all of the cards is amazing, and I have included images of all of the new cards as well as the reprint cards in here, and I've tried to organize them in a way that you can more clearly see which cards synergize well with each other. So let's start off looking at the commanders. The first one is Zarek the Silent King. Now they revealed this card first a few weeks ago before the rest of the deck, and a lot of people expressed disappointment because this is like a really, powerful, iconic, legendary character, and they made him into a 3/4 with flying with what seems like a really terrible ability where you mill yourself 3 cards. You put the top 3 cards of your deck into your graveyard, and then you can just take one artifact, creature, or vehicle from among those cards and put it back into your hand. By itself, this is a pretty bad ability, especially compared to all of the other possible commanders out there. But again, when I first saw this, I just assumed that the rest of the deck would revolve around, putting things in your graveyard and then making use of them, using the graveyard as a resource. And that's essentially what it does. When you look at the rest of the cards in the deck, this isn't so bad. Though I think Imhotep the Stormlord is possibly a better commander. He has a ability that just seems a little less likely to hurt yourself. So for 4 mana, he's a 3/3, and his first ability allows you to create 2 2/2 black Necron warrior tokens, as seen on the right, every time one or more artifact cards leaves your graveyard. So this can activate multiple times per turn. It synergizes with a lot of the other cards that we'll see in the deck. One thing to note, though, is that it's not for each artifact that leaves your graveyard. So if something pulls like multiple cards from your graveyard, it will still only create 2 of those creatures. And then his second ability gives another artifact creature, +2/+2, and menace until end of turn at the beginning of combat on your turn. So menace, again, requires 2 or more creatures to block that creature. We also have a few other legendary characters that you could potentially use as commanders in this deck, this being mono black. You don't have to worry about commanders with different colors, but this is Anrakir the Traveler. For 5 mana, he's a 4/4, and whenever he attacks, you can cast an artifact spell from your hand or graveyard by paying life instead of the mana cost. So potentially pretty powerful, allowing you to play cards on your turn that you normally do not have the mana for. Next up is Trazyn the Infinite. At 6 mana, he's a 4/6 with Death Touch. So stats-wise, he's actually the strongest legendary creature in this deck. And his unique ability, Prismatic Gallery, sounds pretty crazy. As long as he's on the battlefield, he has all activated abilities of all artifact cards in your graveyard. So, yeah, again, that sounds pretty insane, but you do have to keep in mind that a lot of the abilities on at least the artifact creature cards in this deck are triggered abilities and not activated abilities. Activated abilities require a mana cost or require the card to tap. So the number of abilities you can copy from artifact creatures is pretty limited, but it does apply to just regular artifacts in your graveyard. So for example, if you are milling yourself and you accidentally mill some artifacts, with Trazyn you can then use those abilities while those cards are in the graveyard. And then the last legendary creature in this deck is Illuminor Xeris. 3 mana for 3/3. And he can tap to sacrifice one of your creatures to add an amount of black mana equal to its mana value. Alright, moving on to some of the regular creatures here. We've got the Lich card. This is 3 mana for 2/3, and Guardian Protocols. Its ability, you can pay for and sacrifice the Lich card to return all legendary creatures from your graveyard to your hand. And this does combo pretty nicely with Imhotep, whose ability triggers when the cards leave your graveyard. They don't have to come back to the battlefield, just back to your hand, and you get some free Necron warriors. We got the Psychomancer, 2 mana for a 1/1 with flying. As a Harbinger of Despair, it causes target opponent to lose 1 life and you gain 1 life anytime the Psychomancer or another non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile. And we'll see a number of cards with an ability called Unearth, which brings them back to the battlefield, but then exiles them at the end of the turn. So this combos with all of that. We got the Necron Overlord, 4 mana for a 2/5, which can tap, and you pay X mana to tap X untapped artifacts and cause an opponent to lose X life. A lot of the artifacts that you play will probably have activated abilities where they tap already. You can use this to tap your creatures, though, as well. We got the Chronomancer, 2 mana for a 1/1 of flying. This one you can tap and pay 1 colorless to sacrifice another artifact to draw a card. And this is one of many cards with Unearth for 3 mana. You can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gets haste, but then you have to exile it at the end of the turn and it gets removed from the game. Next up, we got the Canoptek Scarab Swarm, 4 mana for a 1/1 with flying. And this one actually exiles the entire graveyard of any player. And then you can get a 1/1 flying insect token, as seen on the right, a little scarab there, for each artifact or land exiled this way. So in most cases, this is not really going to have much of an effect on your opponents. If you exile your own graveyard, you'll probably get the most out of this, especially if you are running the Silent King as your commander and you're milling yourself, because you're very likely to mill artifacts or lands. For 5 mana, we got the Canoptek Spider, which is 5 mana for a 4/4 with flying, and whenever a non-token artifact creature or vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, you can draw a card. So again, this applies if you're playing it from your hand or bringing it back through Unearth or some other means. We got the Canoptek Wraith, 3 mana for a 2/1 that cannot be blocked. It's unblockable. And Transdimensional Scout. When it deals combat damage, you can pay 3 and sacrifice it to get 2 basic lands onto the battlefield tapped. We got the Ghost Ark. This is a 4 mana vehicle, so it's not a creature unless it's crewed by creatures with power 2 or more. And when it becomes a creature, it's a 3/3 with flying, and its ability, Repair Barge, gives all artifact creatures in your graveyard Unearth for 3 mana until end of turn. So interesting ability there, and this actually combos really well with another card that we'll see. Convergence of Dominion. This is a 3 mana artifact, and as long as you control your commander, activated abilities of cards in your graveyard cost 2 less to activate. So this, of course, applies to Unearth, and a lot of the Unearth costs tend to be pretty expensive. But, I mean, especially if you have the Ghost Ark on the field, you can Unearth any creature in your graveyard for just 1 mana, which is really nice. It also has another ability, pay 3 and tap it to mill yourself 3 cards. Then we got the Cryptek, 4 mana for a 3/3. You can pay 2 and tap it to choose another target artifact creature you control, and when it dies this turn, you can return it to the battlefield again tapped under your control. So this has the potential to be really powerful with a number of creatures that have abilities that activate when they enter the battlefield, which we're about to look at. So this is the Necron Deathmark, 5 mana for a 5/3 with flash, so you can play it on your opponent's turns at instant speed. And Synaptic Disintegrator, when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target creature, and target player mills 3 cards. So pretty powerful ability there, especially if you can use it multiple times. We got the Locust Heavy Destroyer, 4 mana, including 3 black, to cast it. It's a 3/2 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. And then it's got Unearth for a whopping 8 mana, but of course you have other ways of bringing it back as well. You do have to sacrifice a creature yourself, but again, you can probably just bring that one back anyway. We've got the Plasmancer, which is 4 mana for a 3/3 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a swamp, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library. So some land fetch there. Again, you can use this multiple times if you bring it back. Got the Night Scythe. This is a 3-mana artifact vehicle, and then it has Crew 2. So it's mainly just good to get that free token on the field. We got the Royal Warden, 5 mana for a 3/2, and its ability Phalanx Commander. It creates 2 2/2 Necron Warrior tokens. This one has Unearth built into it for 4 mana. We got the Technomancer. This one's pretty expensive at 7 mana for a 5/1. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards yourself, and then you can return any number of the artifact creatures with total value 6 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Nice thing about this is that you can choose from all cards in your graveyard, not just the ones that you milled through this card. So potentially you can get some pretty good stuff on the field. And then we got spells that can bring stuff back. So Dread Return, it is a reprint with some pretty awesome looking artwork there. 4 mana sorcery. You can return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then it also has flashback if you sacrifice 3 creatures. So this one's nice if you want to keep the card that you are bringing back. Like if you use Unearth, then you're going to lose it at the end of the turn permanently. But this one can bring back one of your stronger creatures. Beacon of Rest is another reprint that can bring back any artifact or creature from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Pretty decent sorcery. Apologies for the blurry card, but this was the best image I could find at the moment that I made this video. Canoptech Tomb Sentinel, just 4 mana for a 4/3 with Vigilance, so it doesn't tap to attack. And Exile Cannon. So when it enters the battlefield from a graveyard, you exile up to 1. Target non-land permanent. So it does have to die or get milled in order for you to use that ability. And it does have Unearth for 7 mana. The Triarch Praetorian also only activates its ability when it comes from a graveyard. It's 2 mana for a 2/1 with flying, and when it comes back from the graveyard, you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. It also has Unearth as well. And then there's the Flayed one, 3 mana for a 4/1 with lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, you just mill 3 cards. Moving on to other cards that have useful abilities, we've got the Cryptothrall, 4 mana for a 3/3, which gives all of your other artifact creatures hexproof. Very useful ability there. The Scorpek Lord, 3 mana for a 3/2 with Menace, and it gives all other artifact creatures +1, +0, and Menace. You can also unearth it for 3, so pretty cheap buff there. The Triarch Stalker is 5 mana for a 4/5 with targeting relay at the beginning of combat on your turn. Choose an opponent, and then until your turn comes around again, creatures attacking that player have Menace. So this affects your opponent's creatures as well if you're playing with 3 or more people. Got the Scorpek Destroyer, 4 mana for a 4/2 with Death Touch, and it gains first strike until end of turn whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control. You got the Hexmark Destroyer. This thing has 6 arms, so it has 6 in almost every single bit of the card. 6 mana for a 6/6. It can't be blocked except by 6 or more creatures, and you can unearth it for 6 mana. 6 creatures is quite a bit, so this thing will be able to get through enemy lines to deal some good damage. We got the Necron Monolith, 7 mana for a artifact vehicle. It's a 7/7 with flying and indestructible, so it cannot be destroyed. It does take 4 to crew it though. But when it attacks, you mill yourself 3 cards, and for each creature milled this way, you get a 2/2 Necron Warrior token. So you could potentially use those tokens to crew it later on. We got the Tomb Blade. It's 6 mana for a 5/4 with flying. Another example of a unit that is relatively weak on the tabletop, but has really good stats as a card here. And when it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creatures they control unless they sacrifice a creature. Pretty strong ability, and you can unearth it for 8. Now we're getting to the really big stuff. This is a fun card. The Shard of the Nightbringer, 8 mana for an 8/8 with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, target opponent loses half their life rounded up, and you gain an equal amount of life. So that is very strong. But in most cases, you'll probably only be able to use it once, because returning it to the battlefield from your graveyard will not trigger that ability. In most cases, I think you'd have to bring it back to your hand first. We got the Shard of the Void Dragon, 7 mana for 7/7 with flying, and whenever it attacks, each opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent. And then the second ability, Matter Absorption, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile, so this combos with Unearth, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on this guy, so he can get very big, very fast. We've got the Sautek Immortal, 3 mana for a 2/2 with Flash. And when it enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter for each creature that died this turn. So it combos well with a board wipe. Mutilate is a nice one that combos with it. 4 mana to give all creatures -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. There's a bigger board wipe here. Their Name is Death, 6 mana sorcery that destroys all non-artifact creatures. So pretty much everything in the Necron deck, except for the Catan shards, are artifact creatures. Living Death is a fun sorcery that exiles all creatures from all graveyards. Then everyone sacrifices all creatures they control and then put the creatures they exiled from the graveyard back onto the battlefield. And then we got some more targeted removal. Defile is just 1 black mana to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. Go for the Throat, 2 mana to destroy a non-artifact creature. And Darkness is a very useful spell, 1 black mana to prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. Their number is Legion, is inexpensive but powerful sorcery you can use in the late game. It costs 4 black mana, and then you pay an additional X for the mana cost to create X 2/2 Necron Warrior tokens, and you gain life equal to the total number of artifacts you control. And then you exile this, but you can cast it from your graveyard if you accidentally mill it. Biotransference is a 4 mana enchantment, which turns all of your creatures into artifacts. Of course, in this deck, it'll only actually affect the Catan. But whenever you cast any artifact, including artifact creatures, you lose 1 life and create a 2/2 Necron Warrior token. So a reliable way to get more troops on the field. Out of the Tombs, this is a fun enchantment. It's 3 mana, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you put 2 Eon counters on this thing, and then mill cards equal to the number of Eon counters on it. So it starts occurring on the turn after you play it. You would mill 2, and then the following turn you mill 4, then 6, then 8. But if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you can't, you lose the game. Pretty ridiculous ability. Do keep in mind that your library has to be completely out of cards before the second ability actually starts to work, though. We got the War in Heaven, represented by a Saga. It is 6 mana. On the first turn, you draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. On the second turn, you just mill yourself 3 cards. And on the third turn, you can choose up to 3 target creature cards with a total mana value of 8 or less in your graveyard and return them to the battlefield with a Necrodermist counter, which makes them count as artifacts in addition to other types. Expensive card, but powerful effect. And unsurprisingly, we have a ton of artifacts. So this is the Resurrection Orb for 2 mana. It's an equipment, and it gives the equipped creature lifelink. When it dies, you can return the card to the battlefield under owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So a very powerful ability there. Again, it combos with the cards that have those triggered abilities when they enter the battlefield. It does cost quite a bit to equip it, though, 4 mana, so use it wisely. We've got Cranial Plating, another equipment for 2 mana, and it gives the equipped creature +1/+0 for each artifact you control. Potentially very strong. You can equip it for 1 mana. You can also attach it to a creature for 2 black mana, which you can use on your opponent's turn. Mask of Memory is another equipment for 2 mana, and whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player, you can draw 2 cards, and if you do, you discard a card. Again, discarding cards, not necessarily a bad thing in this deck. Endless Atlas is a nice card, 2 mana artifact. You can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, but activate it only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name, which in this deck will be swamps. And then we got a whole lot of mana-producing artifacts. So most of these are reprints. We got Arcane Signet and Commander's Sphere to add 1 mana of any color. We also got a legendary artifact here. This is the Silent King's Staff, the Scepter of Eternal Glory. It's 4 mana, so fairly expensive, to add 1 mana of any color. Or you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color, but you can only use that if you have 3 or more lands with the same name on the field. Some more mana-producing stuff: Mind Stone, Thought Vessel, and Unstable Obelisk. And then we've also got Soul Ring, of course, and Hedron Archive to add 2 colorless mana. You can also sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And Gilded Lotus, which can add 3 mana of any one color. We got Cage Stun with some really cool artwork. It's a pity that we don't actually see the Transcendent as a card itself here, but it's a powerful card that can double your black mana production as well as buff all of your black creatures on the field. Got Mystic Forge, 4 mana artifact, which allows you to look at the top card of your library anytime, and you can cast that top card if it's an artifact or colorless spell. You can also tap it and pay 1 life to exile the top card of your library if you don't like it. Sculpting Steel is really nice, 3 mana artifact that can enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact. And yes, this can copy artifact creatures too. We got a new land, Tomb Fortress, which enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add black. You can also pay 5 and then exile it to mill 4 cards and return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And again, this one also, you can choose from any card in your entire graveyard. And then we got a bunch of reprint lands with some nice Necron-themed artwork: Reliquary Tower, Barren Moor, Desert of the Glorified, and Polluted Mire, and Myriad Landscape. And we got Vault of Whispers, which is an artifact land. There's also the Wayfarer's Bauble, another reprint artifact, which allows you to search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. There are 30 swamps in this deck, but they have new Necron-themed artwork. So that is everything from this Necron Dynasties deck. Let me know what you think of this one, if you think the Necrons were represented well in card form, and if there are any combos that I missed in this video, let me know in the comments. But thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.